Hola clase y bienvenidos a la lección del presente en español. Good morning class and welcome to today's lesson on the present tense in Spanish. When do you use the present in English and Spanish? Whenever you're talking about things that are happening right now. You also use it when you talk about things that are happening in the immediate future. For example, tomorrow we are going to the mountains. It's not happening right now, but we are is the present. Mañana vamos a las montañas. In clase. Now I'm going to recite a short story or monologue, and I'd like you just to listen, class. Listen for verbs in the present tense and let them sink into your mind. Ready? Les voy a describir a un chico, digamos, ficticio y alto y rubio. Este chico alto y rubio se llama simplemente Juan. Y Juan no es un chico típico. De hecho, es un chico bastante distinto de los otros de la misma edad. Es que a Juan le gusta hacer cosas que a los otros chicos no les gusta hacer. ¿Qué tipo de cosas, me preguntas? Pues le gusta dormir en el suelo en vez de en una cama. En serio, duerme en el suelo de su cuarto. A ver, ¿qué más? Le gusta decir lo contrario de lo que quiere decir. ¿Entiendes? Entonces, si Juan tiene hambre, ¿sabes lo que va a decir? Esto dice: no tengo hambre. Cuando sabe la respuesta de alguna u otra pregunta en la clase, ¿qué dice? Claro, yo no sé. Cuando quiere darle un abrazo a su mamá, dice: no te doy un abrazo, mamá, no puedo y no lo quiero hacer. Y cuando quiere hacer una cosa divertida, dice: no quiero hacer eso, hago otra cosa. Y ¿qué otras características distintas podemos encontrar en nuestro protagonista? Bueno, siempre cuando hay tarea para una clase, él llega a su casa y la hace inmediatamente. Le gusta pasar tiempo con varios animales del bosque, como las ardillas, por ejemplo. Siempre pone sus pies en unos baldes llenos de hielo cuando come el desayuno. Cree que puede hablar con los patos. Sin embargo, está seguro de que los gansos no le entienden. En fin, Juan es un chico singular, aunque ¿es realmente tan diferente a ti o a mí? And now the transcription of the story that I just read in Spanish. Muy bien. Now, class, I'd like you all to underline every verb in the present tense. ¿Listos? There they are. Did you get them all? See? All right. Here's a translation of that story in English. Bien? Perfecto. Now, let's talk about verb forms in the present. Do you need to learn all the forms of Spanish verbs in the present? Yes. If not, you won't know who is doing what. And you would have a nonsensical sentence that wouldn't be good for anybody. So, in order to speak correctly, you have to know who is doing what, or the correct form of the verb, and you need to know how to conjugate the verbs, or be familiar with the conjugations. First of all, the subjects that exist in English are the following. In this verb chart here, I, you, he, she, it, we, you, all, and they. The column on the left deals with singular subjects, just one person. The column on the right deals with plural, more than one person. The verb goes at the top of this style of verb chart. And in Spanish, I use the same format, el verbo, arriba, después los sujetos, yo, tú, él, ella, usted, nosotros, vosotros en España, ellos y ustedes. Bien? Here's an example of a verb conjugation in English. The verb is to go. Here's how you conjugate it. I go, you go. He goes, she goes, it goes, we go, you all go, they go. And in Spanish, the verb is ir. Yo voy, tú vas, él va, ella va, usted va, nosotros vamos, vosotros vais, ellos van, ustedes van. For regular verbs in the present tense, there are three sets of endings. Verbs that end in AR, or ar, verbs that end in ER, or and verbs that end in IR, or ir. The endings that correspond to the subjects from the last slide for AR verbs, verbs that end in ar, are the following: o, as, a, amos, an. For ER verbs, they're the following: o, es, hemos, en. For IR verbs, use the following: o, es, imos, en. What's the difference between ER and IR endings? That's right, the nosotros form. You might realize that the vosotros ending, or the plural you form, is missing. I've left it out because it's only used in Spain, and if you want to learn it, you can go to Spain. Otherwise, you use ustedes. The form of ustedes, just like any other Spanish speaker in the world uses when they go to Spain, and you will be understood. So, if you have the verb vivir, and you want to say he lives or he is living, you go to the he form, él vive. What about we eat? If the verb is comer, what would that be, class? Muy bien, comemos. That's pretty easy, right? Unfortunately, there are several irregular verbs in Spanish, and we're going to go through every single type, starting with verbs that have a G or G in the yo form. And here are 6 of them: caer, hacer, poner, salir, traer, and valer. Caer, to fall. The yo form is caigo. Hacer, to do. The yo form is hago. Poner, yo pongo. Salir, yo salgo. Traer, yo traigo. And valer, yo valgo. For these 6 verbs, every other form is regular, except the yo form. The verb haber, it only has one form when it's used as an impersonal verb, meaning there is or there are. Impersonal, meaning there's not a person doing anything like I do or you do. To say there is or there are with the verb haber, you just say this: I, for singular and plural subjects. Hay fiestas, hay helado. More irregular verbs. Verbs that have a G in the yo form and other strangeness. The verb decir, for to say or to tell. It is digo, dices, dice. Decimos, dicen. The italicized forms are the irregular forms. For the verb oír, oigo, oyes, oye, oímos, oyen. Oímos is almost regular, but it has that accent. Tener, tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tienen. And venir is non-regular present tense verbs that are totally irregular. Ir, dar, saber, caber, ser, estar. The verb ir, for to go, conjugates like this. It's totally irregular. Voy, vas, va, vamos, van. The verb ser, also irregular. Soy, eres, es, somos, son. The verb estar, estoy, estás, está, estamos, están. That estamos is regular, but the other forms have accents, or the yo form, which is totally irregular. For dar, the yo form is doy, follows no pattern at all. Yo doy. For saber, yo sé, se with an accent. And then for caber, yo quepo. For those 3 at the bottom, every other form is regular. Here's another non-regular present tense verb, ver. The yo form is veo. Instead of adding an O to the ER, you leave the E and add an O. Veo. The rest is regular. Now stem changing verbs, which some teachers call boot verbs or shoe verbs. Verbs that change from E to IE change like this. For example, the verb querer, meaning to want. The first E, the E in the stem, changes to IE in the present tense in every form except nosotros. So, quiero, quieres, quiere, queremos, quieren. And if you were to draw around the verbs that change, the forms of querer that change in the present tense, the shape would look somewhat like a boot or a shoe. The other verbs at the top have the same change. Bien? Now, another set of stem changing verbs, in this case changing from E to I, like the verb pedir, to ask for, to order. Pido, pides, pide. Pedimos, piden. Several verbs change in this manner. Another type of stem changing verbs, verbs that change from O to UE, for example, volver, vuelvo, vuelves, vuelve, volvemos, vuelven. And the verb jugar is, I believe, the only verb that changes from U to UE. Juego, juegas, juega, jugamos, juegan. Now, some more irregular verbs in the present tense. Every verb that ends in eser or usir conjugates thusly. The yo form gets a ZCO, so conocer is yo conozco. The rest of it's regular. All these verbs do the same thing. Yo crezco, yo pertenezco, yo traduzco, produzco y conduzco. All these verbs follow the same pattern. Every verb that ends in uir, UIR, conjugates the same way. They get a Y. For example, destruir, destruyo, destruyes, destruye, destruimos, destruyen. Every form has a Y except nosotros. Verbs that end in ER and UR. Every verb that ends in UAR gets an accent, and several verbs that end in IAR get an accent in the present tense. For example, guiar, guio, guías, guía, guiamos, guían. Every form has an accent over the I except nosotros. Actuar, actúo, actúas, actúa, actuamos, actúan. Accent over the U in every form except nosotros. Verbs that end in ger and gir, G-E-R and G-I-R. In the yo form, these verbs get a J. Escoger changes to yo escojo. Fingir changes to yo finjo. And the reason is, if you leave the letter G, it turns into a hard G sound in front of an O, and it would be escogo or fingo, and you don't want those sounds. You want to preserve the sound from the infinitive, the ch. Verbs that end in G-U-I-R, not just U-I-R, but G-U-I-R, or gir, have a spelling change in the yo form. They drop the U and just end in O. So distinguir is distingo without the U. But distingues, distingue, and all the others still have the U spelling. Verbs that end in C-E-R and C-I-R, ser and sir, if they have a consonant in front of the C-E-R and the C-I-R, like convencer, vencer, torcer, then the yo form gets a Z. The C changes to Z. For example, vencer, venzo. Torcer, tuerzo, which also has an O to UE change. The reason is, if you have a C in front of an O, it takes a hard C sound, like co, and you want the soft C sound. Verbs with an H in all forms except nosotros. There may only be one in the language. It's oler, to smell. Huelo, hueles, huele. Olemos, huelen. Olemos doesn't have an H. here's some verbs that kind of baffle me. Yacer, to lie or be located somewhere, has 3 yo forms. You could say yo yazgo, yo yazgo, yo yago. Take your pick. Erguir, meaning to straighten or raise something, has 2 forms of everything except nosotros. Yo irgo, yo yergo. Good luck with those. A practicar clase. Now, let's practice some of this theory here. I want you to conjugate the following verbs. Ser, in the yo form. Estar, tú, tener, tú. Hacer, yo, poder, ella. Decir, yo, ir, yo. Dar, yo. Saber, yo. Querer, ellos. Llegar, nosotras, etc. Alright, take about 5 minutes. Unos 5 minutos para terminar esto. Bien, ¿listos? Ahora las respuestas. Now, ready for the answers? Number 1, soy, estás, tienes, hago, puede, digo, voy, doy, sé, with an accent, quieren, llegamos, pasa, deben, pongo, eres, estoy, tengo, puedo, dices, van, quiero, pones, salgo, oigo, duermo, siente, juegas, destruyo. How did you do, class? Perfecto. Now, change these verbs into Spanish. I am, you have, he says, she says, I give, I know, I put, I leave, there is, I make, I do, they want, we give, I can, I should, he goes, you all go, they are, you give, we can, they say, I go, they are, we know, you all want, we should, you make, you put. ¿Cuánto tiempo necesitan? ¿Listos? Bien. Más respuestas. The answers to those verbs are: number 1, soy or estoy. Number 2, soy or estoy. Tienes, dice, doy, sé, pongo, salgo, I, hago, quieren, damos, puedo, debo, va, van, son, están, das, podemos, dicen, voy, hay, sabemos, quieren, queremos, debemos, haces, pones. Bien? Perfecto. Okay, class. Right now, let's take this a step further. Put the following sentences into Spanish. I fall and put and bring and say and do and give and know and fit and hear and have. I see and choose and conquer and continue and pick up and lie in a place. You go and are and close and repeat and sleep and play. You all build and spy and continue and smell and twist. Put those into Spanish, and even before you do that, I'm going to ask that you do one more step. Using the following symbols that represent the parts of speech in the second column, I want you to label those sentences in English with the symbol. We'll work with these symbols throughout the year so that you get a better grasp of grammar and parts of speech, ideally so that you know, for example, what an adverb is. Bien? So, label those English sentences with these parts of speech symbols. Ready? Here's what you should have gotten. You've got pronouns for I, verbs for fall, put, bring, and all the other verbs, and then conjunctions for and. So really, you only have 3 symbols in the first sentence, and the second sentence, and the third. You actually only have 3 symbols for the entire thing. These are simple sentences, although run-on. Bien? Respuestas. Here's what I hope you got in Spanish. Número 1, caigo y pongo y traigo y digo y hago y doy y sé y conozco y quepo y oigo y tengo. 2, veo y escojo y venzo y continúo y recojo y yazgo, y hago. 3, vas y eres y estás y cierras y repites y duermes y juegas. 4, construyen y espían y continúan y huelen y tuercen. Now, in Spanish, the parts of speech are going to be about the same, except for one thing. Which symbol is missing? That's right, the pronoun symbol. Because caigo, that one word means I fall. It's built into the verb. You don't need an additional pronoun in Spanish. And the other three. Bien.